living a life that you don't love, in which you feel that alienation, stagnation, and frustration without a sense of being able to go forward, it can have devastating consequences. Living a life that you love, one that's connected to purpose, that feels free. Well, that's a different matter altogether. That's why I'm here. I myself was a person who for decades lived that life of alienation, separation from myself, and misery. I was a practicing attorney for nearly 20 years, and later I moved into various large organizational senior executive positions before eventually starting my first entrepreneurial venture, which was as a co-owner of a manufacturing company. And during those phases of my life, particularly as I was working for these larger organizations, scrabbling harder and harder to get up that corporate ladder, I felt increasing levels of emptiness and boredom and frustration. And it was putting my mental health, my physical health, and ultimately my career's future at the gravest of possible risk. I was like a deflated raft, crashing on the rocks of the shore of the ocean, circling down. Good news is things were able to change. And the method I discovered for making that change is what I'm going to talk about today. And there's some noise going on in the background. Is it just me that's hearing that? Do we have any idea what that is?
I think it might be Matt Mays, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my apologies.
That's okay. If you could just mute that, I'd be so grateful. It's good to see you, Matt. All right, so I'll continue. So the method that I learned is rooted in, of all things, Greek mythology. Greek mythology, the stories of the gods, goddesses, and heroes that have deeper meanings, that have resonated and transformed lives for thousands of years. They guided my own change. And because I knew that my ultimate destiny would be to help those who were similarly seeking to live a life that they loved, as I used the myths to guide my change, I documented every single step so that I could really provide actionable, meaningful help for those in need. Before we go any further, I'm sure at least one or two of you out there saying, Greek myths, what is this man talking about? And what do they have to do with anything? Before we go into the first step of the process I have for utilizing Greek myths to change your life, let me just explain first what I mean by myths and mythology. People commonly use myths today as a way to describe a story that isn't true. But that's actually not what mythology is. Not at all. A lot of people think that Greek mythology is a group of stories that their teachers forced upon them when they were in grade school, meant solely and only to bore them to tears. But since these stories were first generated thousands of years ago, people have studied them, analyzed them, and attempted to categorize them. Some people have said, for instance, that they are proto-scientific explanations for natural phenomena. Other people have said that they are things like literary inventions or the bases for entertainment of the time. There have been psychologists that have said that they represent certain archetypes. There have been people that say that they represent a whole type of sort of proto-philosophical thinking. The best explanation that I've heard after studying this stuff my entire life has been that they are actually collectively and individually representational narratives that identify the hopes, aspirations, dark sides, and potential futures of a culture. In other words, they represent a cultural identity. And as such, they are the actual externalizations of the identities of every single individual within that culture. Myths are the stories you tell yourself that define your identity. Nothing less. And that's why they've resonated for thousands of years. A toxic narrative will take you further and further away from success and the life that you love. But recognizing what those narratives are and being able to categorize them, put them within a framework that you can understand and then shift, literally gives you the power of the gods. After studying myths my entire life and looking at my own experience as well as working with clients, I've identified 5 broad categories of myths that represent the sorts of toxic narratives that can drive your future or the futures of those you care about down a road that's away from the life that you want to live. And I'm going to talk to you about them briefly right now. Number 1, the tragic origin myth. This, like all 5 of the toxic myths categories, represents a general genre of Greek myth. And there are positive genres too. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to create some of those genres. But for the purposes of this conversation and in light of the time that we have, we're going to focus on the 5 toxic ones. A tragic origin myth. The tragic origin myth is one in which your identity and therefore your future is governed by the circumstances of your birth or your early life. I was born poor. I'll always be poor. Number 2, the social myth. You're living out the social myth if your life, career, or other personal narrative is driven by the social expectations of others. From the time your homeboy here was a little boy, people said, you're going to be a lawyer. Social expectations, the social myth drove me to become exactly that, and I was miserable. Number 3, the ritual myth. The ritual myth occurs when you live a life that is driven by events that are no longer relevant to your future. As a lawyer, I argued all the time. Well, that becomes habituated, and I'm arguing even if it no longer serves me. If that happens, I'm living out the ritual myth, the ritualization of toxic behaviors. Number 4, the doomsday, also known as the apocalyptic myth, myths about the end of the world. People who are living out apocalyptic or doomsday myths are those that fear fundamentally change. Any change or shift is going to lead to disaster. I'm miserable living as an attorney. But if I switch, I'm going to lose all my money, everyone will hate me, and my life will be a disaster. That's living out the doomsday myth. And 5th, the similar but nonetheless subtly distinct underworld myth. The underworld myth is lived when your entire framing of your existence is swathed in the darkness of Hades. You don't see spiritual, emotional, or other light. You live bleakly without hope. Your entire world is as everlasting and dreary as the underworld. The office cynic, or people whose basic approach to life is cynical, without shift, are living examples of the underworld myth. So, to reiterate, the tragic origin myth, the social myth, the ritual myth, the doomsday myth, and the underworld myth. Those are the 5 toxic myths that if we are unable to shift, we will never be able to live the life that we want. And y'all, I believe that we each not only deserve it, but have an ethical obligation to live in a way that's self-actualized and full. And to make it clear, in case I haven't already, I'm an expert in all these things because I've lived all of them. Now, what do each of these myths have in common? In none of them are you playing any of the following 3 roles that define Greek mythology: author of your life, hero of your own story, and an Olympian day to day. When I work with clients, I urge each of them to begin to think of themselves not just as heroes and, of course, as authors of their own life, but as Olympians, because Olympians understood their domain. They were fully self actualized, they were creative, and they demanded tribute from the world. And if you didn't give the Olympian gods their tribute, you knew about it. I want that for every one of my clients. As we move into discussion, I want each of us to think about whether in our own lives or in the lives of those we know and love, the futures being magnetized, being attracted, are truly epic. The first step to having that life is to analyze the myths, the personal narratives that you're telling yourself, and saying, are they one of the 5 toxic ones? If so, it's time to start going all Homer, putting down some poems about your future that are worth remembering. With that said, I will ask each of you, have you lived out one of the toxic myths? Again, I'll repeat them one more time: tragic origin, social, ritual, doomsday, or underworld. If so, how is it manifested? And what can you do to start being an author, a hero, an Olympian?